Hey everybody, this is Devin Townsend and you are watching Chaos TV.
This is kind of the end of the tour. How has it been so far, and why are you ending it to Finland?
Well, I mean, that's the way it was booked in terms of why we're in Finland last. The tour has been profoundly awesome, for me at least. I mean, I've been touring for so many years, and this is the first tour that we've ever done that has been like, I think like 60–70% of the shows have been sold out, and that's never happened, right? And for me, on a personal level, it's really rewarding to be able to play music that I really feel like a connection to and like perform in a way that comes naturally. Because, you know, I think self-esteem has always been something that as a performer, you know, I think you battle with, right? Because you're just like, wow, if, you know, to be seen as the person that you are is like the ultimate kind of like disgrace, right? But then all of a sudden when you get to the point where you're just like, well, there's really no option other than to just allow ourselves to be the person that we are. And people are just like, no, that's fine. We always actually kind of knew you were that way anyway, right? Then the tour has just been, I don't know, man, it's like, it's been a very positive experience. And it's like very nice to finally be in a position where I'm like not afraid of myself and I'm not afraid of like people either, right? So to be able to connect musically and like performance-wise has been, it's a lot of fun. It really is. It's cool.
Is Anneke here as a special guest or special guest for the end of the tour?
Yeah, she's the pitch hitter, right? Because at the end, I've been singing for 3.5–4 weeks, and like, and when I say singing, that's a very loose term, right? Because I've been kind of screaming my balls off for like a month, and my throat is definitely like rolling at about 30% of its, you know, capacity. So when Anneke came in the other day and she's just singing, it's just like this absolutely beautiful sound. I'm just like, thank you very much. So now, like tonight, I'm just like, hey Anneke, do you think you could just sing more, right? Like, and so I just walk up to the microphone every now and then. I'm like, yeah, sing it, right? Like, but I mean, I love Anneke. I mean, I love her as a person, of course, right? But her voice is just so like, you know, like shatteringly beautiful that it's like, you know, it's so awesome to be able, at this point of the tour, to like be able to perform in Finland, which is like, obviously like after last year and everything, it's like an incredibly like touching environment for me to be allowed to play here. I mean, it's awesome. I love it. The support has just been so overwhelming, right? That I was like, oh my God, like to play these last shows and like to be rolling, you know, in without 100% of my voice was like, you know, a worry. I mean, I can definitely fake it. I mean, I've been doing it for so many years that I'm like, there's certain parts where I'm like, okay, well, this part you're never going to hit that note tonight, so like, do this, right? But to have Anneke like really makes the shows like important to me. Like the only real part of the tour that Anneke is involved with is Finland, and I mean, to be perfectly honest, I did Deconstruction and Ghost from the last time I was here. I've been in the studio working ever since, so we managed to get a bunch more visuals and stuff. But you know, for this one last moment in Helsinki, right, that we're going to use some of the Tuska Ziltoid stuff just for fun, right, because I wanted to give it one more shot, right, but you know, when we come back here next time, it'll all be like new stuff and new music and everything, right, but it's so much fun, man.
Okay, would you mind talking about upcoming releases and why you're having so much guests on the album?
Well, these next two records, Deconstruction and Ghost, have been things that I've been planning since the beginning of these 4 record things with the Devin Townsend Project. They've been essential to it and have been planned for 4 years. So to finish it, in one sense, the reason why it's important for me to do these right now is because I wanted to finish it. I didn't want to leave it undone. The benefit of that is you know, I'm able to actualize these things that I've wanted to do for a long time, like make this complicated statement without it having affected me in a way that was like emotionally damaging. It was very easy, and I wanted to make a really beautiful record that was meant to be beautiful and like, you know, soft, and like the intention of it is like I want to make something pretty, right? So to do that is like the benefit, right? The downside, of course, is that any momentum that we kind of have established as a result of like Addicted or whatever is, automatically negated by this like orchestral record about cheeseburgers, right? So having a meeting with the record label yesterday, they're just like, why do you keep doing this to us? And I'm just like, I wish I knew. I thought it was like a logical conclusion, right? Like Addicted to cheeseburgers, right? So, but I mean, the metaphor of what deconstruction is supposed to be about, obviously, I mean, the cheeseburger is like, it's supposed to be humorous. It's supposed to be this sense of like, okay, well, once with Key, there's this idea of like being like very tentative about reconnecting with the elements of my process that I've been afraid of as a result of it leading me in directions in the past, like Alien or Infinity, that have been, steeped in paranoia or like too much self-awareness, right? So with Key, there's like this sense of like wanting to let it go, but it just doesn't. Wanting to let it go, then it doesn't. But by the end, when it does let it go, there's this sense of just like, well, I'm not on drugs, I'm not drinking, I'm a decent person, fuck it. Go for it. And so Addicted, like the whole idea with Addicted is just like, okay, well, what's the nature of addiction? What is it truly that you're addicted to? Maybe you're addicted to like being afraid of yourself. Maybe you're addicted to like self-destruction. Maybe drugs and alcohol and sex and all that stuff is just like a metaphor for something that's truly just within your power to change, right? Maybe that's just all a Band-Aid on something that really comes down to, well, you're afraid of success, or you're afraid of failure, or you're afraid of being seen, right? So Addicted, there's this sort of sense of like euphoria that comes from, well, hey, like we're willing to like find this. We're willing to like explore it. And then with deconstruction, the idea is to like, okay, well, face it, right? Like, face this fear of yourself and figure out what it is about it that is frightening. And then through deconstruction, the whole idea is like, by making it accountable for itself, like making music that is similar to music that I've made in the past that has ended in, drama, right? I realized by making deconstruction that a lot of that drama was self-imposed, with like doing things to myself that I personally shouldn't be doing. Like I don't have any moral stance on drugs or booze. I don't care, But for myself, I realize if I engage in things that I know are counterproductive to my process or to me as a person, then essentially I'm just like imposing that arrogance on everybody else, right? So with deconstruction, when I started working on it, I ended up realizing that, yeah, there's a part of me that's dark. Yeah, there's a part of me that's sadistic. There's a part of me that like enjoys problems and drama and chaos, right? But framing it with Addicted and Ghost and Key, it made it accountable. So I started coming to the conclusion, I'm like, well, I'm not a religious person, right? But I do like, I think spirituality is like a big part of, my life, right? And everybody's to a certain extent, right? So I was like, okay, use the metaphor of hell. So the guy goes to hell and he meets the devil, and not that I necessarily believe that, but when he meets the devil, it's like him. It's him. And he's like, oh, I actually get along with this guy pretty well. We got a lot in common. And so he's like, I got to figure it out. On some level, he's so arrogant, he needs to like understand the nature of reality. He thinks he can do it. He thinks he's wired for it. And so he goes through all this chaotic, stupid music, and there's like orchestras and dumb lyrics and stuff. And so when he finally gets presented what he's been looking at, he gets to stand back, and it's a cheeseburger, right? And he's a vegetarian, so it doesn't apply, right? But the whole point of it is just like, how can you assume that you're capable of understanding like these things that are just so profoundly beyond, the human, ability at this stage of evolution, right? And so I think that's hilarious. I think it's great to have that like irony, that sort of sense of just like, well, you dumb shit. Now you got a headache. You happy? And so with Ghost, the whole idea is just like, okay, well, what is it truly that you like? Is it like artistic masturbation that is like intriguing to you? And if so, why? Is it because you want to be validated by people to say, hey, look, I did a bunch of really annoying scales really fast, right? Or is it like, well, the thing that really is important to me about music is like connecting to the things that are of emotional significance to me, and then hopefully transferring that to other people, right? And in that sense, the whole 4-record project has ended up being neutral. There's no sense, right, in anything. So I'm not going to stop talking.
Okay. Did you figure out what you're afraid of?
Yeah. Yeah, me.
You're afraid of yourself?
Of course.
Okay.
No longer, though. I'm awesome.
Over the years,
Maybe not awesome, but I'm like not that
I'm
scary.
easy.
I'm not that scary. I'm not that scary. Trust me.
okay, have your methods for making music changed over the years and
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In which way?
Well, my process was so heavily tied up in my, the things that I did to kind of spur on that artistic inspiration, smoking weed or like whatever, right? Like, self-destruction. Then when I quit that, I was just like, well, who am I without this, right? And then I realized, well, you know exactly who you are. And then once I was able to connect with that, before I remember I used to smoke tons of weed and I'd sit on the steps of my house and I'd play I'd come up with a riff and I'd play it for 9 hours. I'd never get to the chorus because I'd be like, dude, this sounds so awesome, right? It's like, we need more echo on this. We need to make this but I'd never get on it. I never moved past it. I was like so hung up on listening to it. And now, man, I just kind of go, okay, that's the verse, that's the chorus, cool song, next. You know what I mean? It's like, I find that without being fascinated by myself and without being fascinated by the process, it like makes it very easy to write and quickly, right? And I think Deconstruction is really a good example of that because it starts in a very definite place and it ends in a very definite place. But the whole thing is supposed to be like a stream of conscience, that like one thing leads to another to like these really abstract places. But by the end of it, it's like, okay, good. Did you figure that out? All right, next, right?
Okay, so basically you're saying taking your music and convey it.
In a sense, but I think that sort of implies that it's something I'm not emotionally connected to because it's not a factory. But it's like, I guess when I was thinking about the process and about myself so much, I spent way too much time like focusing on it rather than just like doing it. We got as much time as we need. It's all good.
Would you agree to reunite with Strapping Young Lad if asked properly?
Well, see, the thing is, okay, and I'm going to give a very evasive answer on this because, again, as you can well tell, I like the sound of my own voice, right? But I mean, the way I write music is very much, in my opinion, different than the way that, Judas Priest or Slayer or whatever. And not that I'd love to be able to write like that, right? But when I write, it's very much a direct representation of why I'm doing things I'm doing, and it's correlated to periods of emotional development or whatever. For example, if I have a moment that is emotionally significant to me, my reaction to it has always been music. Some people paint. They're like, oh, I'm in a good mood, so here's a bunch of yellow paints. I don't paint. I can't paint at all. But I find that my talent is being able to put together certain series of notes that remind me of those moments, right? And then at the end of periods where I've had those moments, I'm able to listen back and say, oh, okay, objectively, you were feeling this. These were your hang-ups, and as a result of actualizing it, you can move on. Great. Strapping Lad was no different. When I was 23 years old, I was city to the core. The moments in my life that resulted in that music were very much a result of where I was at in life. And so as a result of like solving it, as a result of like actualizing it into records and being able to move on, I'm like, great, thank you very much. That record was incredibly important to me. Strapping Lad was incredibly important to me. And the reason it doesn't exist anymore is because I'm not there anymore. I don't do drugs. I got a kid. I'm like 38 years old. I don't feel like doing that anymore. The nihilistic energy and like the kind of suicidal approach to music that was essential to making Strapping Lad what it was something that I was working hard from the very first record to like get past, right? So in order to reconnect with it right now, I think it's like essentially what you're doing is you're like discrediting the things about the music that made people so attached to it, which was the fact that it was from the heart. I'm not there anymore. I'm like in a different place. I'd love to be able to say, no, I'll never do it again, but I mean, I like having that sort of like definitive thing is also like rude, and I think more than anything else at this point, I'm like saying it doesn't make any sense to me to do it. And in all honesty, the tours that I'm doing now are like more successful than anything that I've done, and I'm actually very happy right now. And when I was doing Strapping, I loved the band, I loved the guys, but I was more unhappy then than I've ever been in my life. So, one thing leads to another at this point, and I've got to follow the things that make me happy currently. See, I told you it was going to be long-winded. But the thing is, it's too much open to interpretation, so I have to do this.
You wanted to become a professional puppeteer.
That's right.
So what brought you into this and what inspired you of those?
The Dark Crystal, the movie The Dark Crystal. It was like Jim Henson, you know, in like mid-'80s, he did this kind of like, you know, kind of puppet version of Lord of the Rings, I guess, you know. And I was 8 years old, and I remember just going, that is awesome, right? Like, you know, big crazy puppets, and like, maybe there's something about like manipulating inanimate things that I think is like really cool, right? You know. But yeah, really, there's a simple. If I wasn't a musician right now, my skill set is pretty limited, to be perfectly honest. You know, I can make food poorly, and I can make shitty furniture if pressed, and I'm good at manual labor, right? So it's like, I think that my options other than music are like, you know, I think we should stick to this, to be perfectly honest.
You did guest voicing on one of the episodes of Metalocalypse, and there was an incident with the original design of Pickles the drummer.
Right.
It looked like you during this college era.
Absolutely.
And then the character was redesigned. So was the similarity in first design intentional?
Yeah, and I asked him to change it, because at that point I was super paranoid. I was like, you know, I was like, I don't want somebody that looks like me as somebody that goes around killing people, and like, I was like super paranoid. And I actually talked to Brandon after when he asked me to do the voice, and I said, dude, I was in a pretty weird space, right? But the fact that he gave him a comb over, it was like awesome, right? I mean, you know, again, it's like the thing with like doing this professionally for so many years, and it's like, I got less answers now than I did when I started, right? And the whole process and all the idiocy and all that, you know, self-analysis and analysis and all that shit that goes into all this stuff is public, you know. I've done so many interviews where I'm just like, oh, this is where I'm at. This is what I feel right now, right? And then 2 months later, I'm just like, oh, actually, no, this is where I'm at, you know. So, like, in terms of, you know, the whole thing with, like, Pickles the drummer, yeah, I freaked out. I didn't want to be seen as like that, right? In hindsight, I think it's hilarious that I was so bent out of shape about it, because, you know, and I think the people that were involved with the show were like, thought it was funny too, right? They gave him a comb over. That's awesome.
Okay, and you did quite an amazing job covering Sinatra's New York, New York. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, like Bob, the guy, the guitar player, he said, oh, you know, we're doing this, and we want you to see if you're interested in doing it. And I mean, I thought it would be a cool opportunity for me to, like, you know, spread my wings a little bit, right? I mean, I definitely like theater. I definitely like being a cheeseball, right? And I think that any opportunity to do so is something I'll definitely take. I mean, the thing with what I've done with music is fortunately, I've never been in the position where people are like, oh, that guy, he's like the cool guy. You know, they're just like, no, it's the fucking banana that plays the puppets, right? So I think that as a result of that, I'm in this actually kind of fortunate position that I can get away with like a lot of shit, because, you know, if I was ever like super cool, if I was ever like part of a super cool thing, they'd be like, well, that's not cool. You know, but to be perfectly honest, I don't want to be part of any club that I can't listen to flute music, you know what I mean? And, you know, I don't want to be, no matter how cool the club is, if I can't play with puppets, I don't want to go, I don't want to be involved, right? No matter how cool the hairdos are, right? So it's like, so I'm going to start my own club. It's like flutes and puppets. You in? She's like, yeah, okay, sounds good.
Motorhead made their own brand of wine, so if you could choose something to label under your name, what would it be?
Oh, God. Okay, I'd make. Me and Buddy had discussed this. I'd make custom underwear that had pre-designed shit stains in it, right? And we call them Sharts. Because then it's like, you know, because think of it, you know, like if somebody's just like, oh my God, you got like skid marks in your underwear, you're like, no, they're Sharts, man. They're like, that's not me. There we go.
Okay, and the last one. Where did the YouTube video clips such as telescopes, arcade, and meatballs?
I was in the middle of working on Key, and, you know, there's elements of Key, they're just like, oh, my life, oh, the drama, right? And I was just like, man, I need a fart joke right now because this is killing me, right? It's like, I think it's important for me, I mean, it's not important, but it's important for me to, like, actualize all these like interpersonal dramas and trying to figure out from one and actualizing my life, and like it's important to me. However pretentious it is, it's important to me, and I'm too old to care about what the ultimate, you know, reason is. I'm a cheese ball, and I do that. There you go. But I think that if you take that seriously, if you really like take that seriously, you're just going to end up vaporizing and disappearing up your own ass, right? And I think that like, so every now and then it's like, well, let's just make something stupid. Let's have talking chins and telescopes are gay. Well, what happened with telescopes are gay actually was like, I had a buddy and I had two buddies over, and the guy was just like, he was being super like emotive. He's like, oh man, I've always wanted to be an astrologer, and I really, you know, and he's like, you know, he's typically kind of like tough guy, right? And he's like having a moment of like vulnerability, and he's like, I really like telescopes. And my other buddy was loaded, and he's just like, telescopes are gay. And then I was just like, we got to make a song, right? So like 15 minutes later, we had this fucking horrible song. So of course, yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense, right? Okay.